Hey there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Book Reviews with Johnny Boy. And today we're talking My Life with Deth by David Ellefson with Joel McIver. And the subtitle is Discovering Meaning in a Life of Rock and Roll. So for those of you who may not know, Dave Ellefson is most famous for being the bassist of Megadeth. So My Life with Deth. Cool title, catchy. Life, Death, by both full letters. So you sound, when you hear the title, you think, okay, this is going to be all about Dave Ellefson's time in Megadeth. Doesn't, it's not that he says it, but that's what I thought it would be. And it wasn't. I'm not saying that it's, illegal marketing or something like that, but I think I was expecting more Megadeth, and it was more just about his whole life, and which is great. That's what I wanted it to be. So I don't know if the title's misleading, but it's a good, really catchy title, and it's a great book. So, So Dave Ellefson takes you on this journey from Jackson, Minnesota, to LA, and then through the whole world. And he's basically grows up as a good kid, more or less, and then gets into a little trouble with drinking in his teenage years, maybe starting around 15 or so. And then he just starts to, he grows up going to church, on a farm, doing farm work, getting some good family values. Although his parents party a little bit, they're not totally strict religious family or anything, but they have their work ethic and they're pretty grounded. Yet he's determined he's going to be a rock and roll musician. And he gets himself to LA right after he graduates high school, roughly. So I want to say 18 or 19. I think it's 19 or so. And then he meets Dave Mustaine very shortly after, like within 2 weeks or something crazy like that. And whatever his plans were for LA to go to a bass institute school, that gets pushed aside for this pursuit of this new band with this kind of very focused, enigmatic, somewhat popular in the underground scene person, Dave Mustaine, who is already 2 years older than Dave Ellefson. Somewhere along the line, Dave Ellefson gets the name Junior, which he doesn't really appreciate. But whatever, it's kind of like a match made in heaven / hell, Dave Ellefson and Dave Mustaine, because it really works, produced great music, some camaraderie throughout the years, but very bumpy. The story of Megadeth goes through lots of lineup changes, transitions, losing band members, firing, some quitting, but through it, the constant is Dave Mustaine and Dave Ellefson are this unit. So it's kind of their band, although it's really Dave Mustaine's band, because he kind of took Ellefson from the beginning and said, hey, come join my band. And then he just kind of spearheaded the whole thing. So Dave Ellefson was his vice president role, but at some point, they had a split. I think it was 2002, actually, that Dave Mustaine quit. And then things had already gotten rocky between them, Dave and Dave. And then Dave Mustaine carries on Megadeth without Dave Ellefson. Once Mustaine feels better and decides he wants to do it again, Ellefson goes on to create a new life, learn that he can be a person without Megadeth, because he never went to college. He never really had proper jobs. He had a few jobs here and there to pay the bills, but he was largely homeless. in those early Megadeth years, homeless meaning living on friends' couches or girlfriends' couches, kind of squatting in people's apartments or whatever studio they were using, they would sleep there. They had like a gym card so they can shower and stuff, really roughing it. And like I said, he started drinking in his teen years. And then in LA, he just kind of carried over to this, well, if you're drinking, you're in a band, hey, want to try Coke? And then the two guys who joined Megadeth, Garth Samuelson and Chris Poland, were jazz fusion guys, and they were kind of familiar with this jazz ethic, which heroin is okay in that world, or at least at the time it was kind of glamorized, and so they thought nothing of it. And then Ellefson was like, yeah, hey, why not? Let's party. So lo and behold, this debauchery goes on, album after album, tour cycle, losing members because they're too messed up, but Ellefson kind of holds it together enough, Mustaine too, but then eventually catches up to Dave Ellefson. He has a meltdown at a really important concert in Europe, and Massa's Rock, was it? And Castle Donington, something like that. And he ends up in rehab. And roughly in 1990, so he was basically an addict, using and abusing for 10 solid years. And then he started to get clean, and it wasn't the miracle right away, but for him it was pretty, his transition into sobriety was pretty clean, in the sense that he didn't fall back, get into drugs and get sober, fall back many times like Dave Mustaine, like Steven Tyler, like many others. Once he got on the straight and narrow, after a couple of bumps, he kind of just stayed the course. Maybe has to do with his solid upbringing on a farm, with this family who loved him, and who he could still communicate with and depend on if he needed them. I imagine that has something to do with it. And it's his character. Where Dave Mustaine was really go for the throat. Dave Mustaine was like, Dave Ellefson, on the other hand, was more like, let's look before we leap, make sure we're not going to totally crash and destroy ourselves. So that there were counterbalance that worked for many years. So you do learn a lot about Megadeth, but there's quite a bit pre-Megadeth, which is cool. You want that if someone tells a life story. And then quite a bit when Megadeth ends, and then he's kind of, he gets into a new band, which he didn't really want to, but then he finds a job with Peavey, and he starts to get confidence as a person in the working world. Of course, you hear about his family quite a bit, his son, his daughter. And then church and faith is a big part of the book. There's quotes from the Bible. I was a little, I don't know about worried about it, because I know Dave Ellefson's vibe. I figure if I like him, I'm going to like his book, and it was true. He doesn't talk about faith in a way that really makes you uncomfortable if it's not your faith, He allows for you to be you, and he tells you this is how it is for me, and he explains his Christian faith. And he was a non-believer for many years and angry at God and didn't make sense. And so, you could relate to him and he could relate to you, no matter where you are on the spectrum, most likely. If you're a fan of his anyway. Definitely recommend it for any Megadeth fan and any Dave Ellefson fan, of course. I think it's classified as biography and criticism. I'm not sure what that means, but I guess just kind of like commentary on the time. So it was a co-write, whatever you call that. There's Dave Ellefson here, and that's his co-writer, Joel McIver. So it does read a little bit like So my criticisms of the book, for what they're worth, and just so you know what you're getting yourself into if you get it, is that it's kind of, he had to be talked into doing it, which is cool. You know, it's like people wanted him to do it, and he agreed that it made sense. And so it does read a little bit like an interview at times, like just him, because that's how it was. He would get on Skype with this Joel McIver guy, and they would talk about his life, and Joel McIver kind of sorted out and made into this narrative that flowed, although it's mostly Ellefson's words, I guess. But because of that, it has this kind of talky feel, less like a, novel, or I don't know. It's very kind of light in that way, which makes it easy reading. I read this very quickly, for me, because I usually don't read books that quickly. Maybe a little more than a week, just reading every day. And I usually try not to read too much, because when I love a book, so I want to, let it enjoy it a little longer. But yeah, and one thing he says, which I kind of made a vow to myself not to do in my book, is just to say, I remember, when you talk about the past, I remember it was 1985, and I recall I just don't want to do that in my own book, because when I read that, I mean, that for him, it totally makes sense, because he was in a conversation with his co-author saying, yeah, I remember it was like this. And I guess in a way, if you're on drugs and stuff, maybe it's important to say, I remember, because you don't know if you're telling the truth. You're like, oh, I remember it this way. Who knows if it actually happened that way, but to hear, I remember over and over again, it's a little bit of a bump in the flow of it. As a critical reader, whatever, I would read it again. It's not like a big problem. It was a great book. Didn't hurt the book in any way. Like just said, just made it sound conversational, very casual. It's nice to know that Ellefson was very respectful of Metallica. And I later found out, after, while reading it, that he did this bass solo tribute to Cliff Burton, including bits of Orion and Anesthesia Pointy. That's cool. And that he was kind of a candidate for Metallica as a bassist when Metallica was looking. I doubt he would have taken it. At that time, he was probably wanted to keep things simple, but of course he could play Metallica parts, And it's cool that he has like a 5-string. That's his thing. Even shows pictures of his dad when he was a kid and his grandparents, I think, and a lot of pictures about him and his family. That's great. It's not, I'm pretty sure there's not a single Megadeth picture here. Like here's one during P-Cell's era, but it's not the band. It's like friends. Yeah, I don't think there's a single Megadeth picture in here, like exclusively Megadeth, which is really great, because he's probably, wants to extract himself from being pinned. And then if you include one lineup, why don't you include the other? And probably a headache. And I think that was a cool choice. But again, slightly misleading. My Life with Deth, not a single Megadeth picture in here. It's like, okay. And then he did this thing as a church. In church, his church, he did something called Mega Life, which involved music, I think, tied into the recovery program, recovering alcoholics and stuff, if I understand it right. Yeah, I think. And yeah, so he's big in recovery, and his sobriety comes up a lot, and how important it is for him to stay sober, because, his personality is kind of extreme when it comes to that type of thing. Yeah, quite honest feeling. I know there's been controversy with Dave Ellefson a little bit in the press in the past, I don't know how many years after the book was published. The book was published 2013, and he was still in Megadeth at the time. I know since there's been a split, and then him and Dave fell out again, which is a shame and kind of silly, but I still like both of them. I like Dave Ellefson and Dave Mustaine, and I appreciate what they've done for music and heavy metal. And I like that they're people who have faith, even though their music seems so edgy and like negative a lot of times. They both have, at this point, and for many years, I suppose, deep faith in God, or essentially goodness. You know, they believe in Jesus, humanity, you know, even if they express it in funny ways. Yeah, I do get a feeling he's a pretty cool guy, and very glad he wrote the book and co-wrote it, whatever you want to say. Highly recommend it. The foreword by Alice Cooper was super brief. It was like half a page. But it's cool. It goes because Alice Cooper also pops up in Dave Mustaine's autobio. And I have to say that this is 2 years after Mustaine's book, I believe. He's very generous. Ellefson is very generous about when he speaks to Dave Mustaine. I don't think there's like one criticism in here, because I guess he just wanted to keep that clean. I'm sure he's had his very strong opinions over the years, but he's like, let's keep it simple, and that's very respectable about him. There's really no gossip, nothing. Nothing foul about people. It was as honest as he could manage. Maybe sometimes he apologizes for the end. He's like, maybe I don't think I'm perfect. If I come off that I do think I'm perfect, I'm sorry. And it's fair because he does sound very confident in the book about his life and who he is and his worth. But I think it's like hard-earned, that feeling. So he just wants to put that first, you know. And it's quite a different read from Mustaine's book. I would say a lot lighter. Although Mustaine's book was not as heavy as I thought it would be. And of course, this made me go back and listen to a little bit more of the Megadeth stuff I wasn't as familiar with. And some stuff, you know, I was. But like I listened to Cryptic Writings a little more because I learned about that through here. And I listened to Risk a tiny bit, not a fan. World Needs a Hero a tiny bit. And then his first one back, which was 13, I think. I didn't know that album existed, you know, like it's funny how when you grow up what's so important in youth, it just kind of falls by the wayside sometimes. But yeah, it was a cool album, 13. And some of his other music, he had a band called F5, pretty cool. It's like what Kai and I, my son and I said, that's what we wish new metal sounded like. It has like the heavy sound and the rhythm and a little bit of that screaming touch, the drop D, but it doesn't make you feel icky like a lot of new metal does. It kind of rocks and it's just cool. It's Seven Dust-ish, kind of. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. Yeah, it is very easy to read. Oh, and one cool, different type of thing he has in here is these like little, I guess Joel McIver thought about, I don't know, but it's like comments of people in Dave Ellefson's world and history. They'll just say a little bit about Dave Ellefson's character, and it's fit into the book in these very appropriate places where they're talking about that era of his life. You know, let's say, I don't know, like Chris Poland will pop up at a part where they're talking about peace sells or something, and it'll just be a little bit about what Chris Poland thinks about Dave Ellefson, things like that. And so you do get, you know, quite a bit, not quite a bit. You get a little bit for each album. You might get about a page or two for the album and the tour cycle in those early days. Sometimes 3 pages. Like Countdown to Extinction was a good time for him. And euthanasia. And I didn't really realize that Rust in Peace was written mostly wasted. I kind of knew that, but I didn't know it was recorded sober. Like everyone was basically sober when they recorded it, but they wrote it doing hard drugs and stuff. Something like that. Very rocky, very interesting, but I definitely understand the dynamics of the band better now and how it is quite different from the Metallica dynamics, which I can't say I understand them so well, but I always knew they felt pretty different from Megadeth. Yeah, very respectful of the thrash metal scene, and you know, his time away from Megadeth probably gave him a lot of perspective, a lot of growth as a human being. Of course, being a dad helped, and then he's trained to be, at the end of the book, he's trained to be a pastor. So, yeah, remind me a little bit of the way I want to write my own book and the way I am writing my own book, because it's not just a rock and roll story. It's also rock and roll and then spirituality and life and growing up and making meaning of it all, telling the dark and the light, which mine tries to encompass my whole life, not focusing on any particular era. And he did that pretty well. I mean, you would think he would focus on the Megadeth stuff the most, and maybe he did, you know, for the point of perspective of selling the book, but there was quite a bit of non-Megadeth stuff in there that, you know, made it feel more balanced. And his life was very Megadeth for a long time. You know, I don't have anything to compare that to in my life with musically. So it felt pretty balanced. He did talk about his life as a whole, more or less. All right. Well, that's all for now. I thought I would have a lot to say about it. And until next time, keep reading, keep enjoying, and I'll see you soon.